in the weekly series, the first program. And we'll be once again today in a different circumstances discussing China. And our topic is how to deal with China and overtake them economically. So with this, I would ask Dr. Swamy to make his remarks and start the discussion. Dr. Arvind Chaturvedi also will be participating. He has also China. So with this, I request Dr. Swamy to please start with his introductory comments. Over to Dr. Swamy.
Well, the provocation for having this topic today, at least from my point of view, is the extremely serious development that has taken place in the area of Ladakh, the state, I should say, the Union Territory of Ladakh. And it's not that in the last 6 years of Narendra Modi's tenure as Prime Minister, we haven't had similar kind of incidents on a lower temperature or a lower, seriousness. For instance, we had this Dokalam thing in Bhutan, and that, of course, was a third country, and it got resolved. But I think there too, I think the Chinese now have directly started dealing with Bhutan, which earlier on was prohibited by our agreement with Bhutan. So there's also a setback there. You may recall that the first meeting when Xi Jinping came to India after Modi became Prime Minister, he flew to Gujarat, where the two of them sat in the Jula and discussed, and a lot of bonhomie. But when they returned to Delhi in the parting press conference, Modi said that he doesn't approve of Chinese troops having open fire or something like that. It was hushed up, but he did say that. In fact, there was an incident which we hushed up. There have been incidents throughout the last 6 years, not very serious. They're coming, most of the time it was mukkabaji, that is just boxing, not bullet firing. And this time they have actually crossed the line of actual control, which both sides had agreed, and have occupied perhaps 120 square kilometers of land in 4 different places. And now, both sides have agreed to have a discussion, but it's a funny discussion because they are in possession of land. We have nothing to bargain with except to say that it is our land, please get out. It's a bit one-sided negotiation, discussion. But anyway, be that as it may, we have to, somewhere seriously discuss in our country how to deal with China. We have been swinging from one extreme to another. We were Hindi Chini bye-bye, then they became enemies, then again we became friends, then Mr. Modi said we are strategic allies, and now we have come down to ordinary, opponents on the ground. So we need a doctrine, a China doctrine, which tells us how we should behave with them. And I have a lot of experience in dealing with the Chinese, right all the way from the topmost Deng Xiaoping down to professors and the Communist Party officials. I've been to their Communist Party headquarters in outside Beijing, and so I'm familiar with them. I've studied China, and therefore I thought it would be good if I put the Indian national interest approach to dealing with China. Now, remember that we have many experiences to study before we come to a conclusion. We took the most pro-Chinese stand after 1949, when the Americans unhappy that Kuomintang, China was thrown out and Mao Zedong took over power on the 1st of October 1949 and declared the People's Republic of China. And he became the first chairman or president. And then at that time, the Americans decided to expel China from the Security Council and the United Nations. And the Security Council, the 5 nations were chosen in 1945 when it was decided to set up the United Nations. And 5 nations were chosen for being the members of the Security Council, permanent members, and they would have a veto. And at that time, Roosevelt floated the idea that there should be a 6th nation, that's India. But Churchill objected, saying it's our colony and you can't bring India into this. If you want to deal with India, you have to talk with me. That is what Churchill said. And, nobody was in a mood to push for India's case, and the matter was dropped. But in 1949, when the communists took over, the Americans got enraged and they expelled. They used their strength to expel. They had the majority. Only Russia, the Soviet Union that time, was opposed, and so 4-1 they expelled China from the Security Council. And then John Foster Dulles met our ambassador, Ms. Vijayalakshmi Pandit, the sister of Jawaharlal Nehru, and said that we would like India to take this chair. And Vijayalakshmi Pandit then sent a cable or a secret letter to Jawaharlal Nehru, who got very upset with her and said, you don't understand these intricacies of international politics. Don't get into it. You just give cocktail parties and forget that's all your work is as an ambassador. I mean, he was very angry with her. And then the matter was dropped and we declined. And then Jawaharlal Nehru made a statement that this chair belongs to China. It doesn't matter which government is there. Today, the communist government of China is in total control. So their chair should be given to them. Now that, of course, the Americans refused. They refused their membership of the UN. India then, every General Assembly session in September of every year, made a speech saying that China should be given this, should be admitted to the United Nations and given the Security Council permanent seat. And we did it even after 1962. I mean, such loyalty I have not seen. And in 1971, the Americans found Deng Xiaoping as a very practical leader, and they entered into an agreement with China, and they went the whole hog. They gave them trade benefits, which they never gave to India. It was a complete. Main reason was that by then the Chinese had become anti-Soviet. So to put the Soviet Union in its place, of course, there's no Soviet Union today. It's all broken up into 16 countries. Only one residual part is called Russia. So that Soviet Union was an enemy of the United States. So they were enjoying the fact that China, a big country, neighbor of Soviet Union, was there. I'm telling you all this because please understand that we have been behaving with China not as an equal country, but as a supplicant, all through. And that is precisely why China has contempt for you in your dealings. So that, you go down the line, then Jawaharlal Nehru didn't stop there. The Chinese then sent their army into Tibet and, took over Tibet. And the Dalai Lama appealed to us for help and we didn't give him, so he signed an agreement in 1956, I think, with the Chinese accepting Chinese sovereignty over Tibet. And India then in 1954, before Dalai Lama did it, signed an agreement with, which was called the Panchsheel Agreement, with China, where they said Tibet is an autonomous region of China. and the sovereignty of China is complete on it. Of course, there was some haggle whether we had agreed to suzerainty or sovereignty, and Nehru told a lie in Parliament that the Chinese language does not have sovereignty and suzerainty separate, which is rubbish. Suzerainty has 3 Chinese characters, and sovereignty has only 2 Chinese characters, and they have different pronunciations. Therefore, but anyway, we sold Tibet down the river. Sardar Patel had written a letter in 1950 that please don't allow the Chinese to come to our boundary if you give up Tibet. But Jawaharlal Nehru gave him a lecture, wrote him a letter, these are fine points of foreign policy, you should not be interested in it, and so on. It was quite insulting. But so Patel was at that time very sick, and he in fact died 1 month later. He wrote the letter on November 18th, 1950, and died in December 1950. So December 15th. So, but he said, if you ultimately have made up your mind to sell out Tibet, then at least put conditions that we can't agree unless you agree to the border. The McMohan Line, as far as the eastern part is concerned, and the Macartney Line, as far as Aksai Chin, the Aksai Chin part is concerned. If you make them agree, they will agree. They are in a weak moment on this. They need our okay. They can't allow Tibet to remain, a disputed area. So even that, Jawaharlal Nehru did not intervene. Later on, of course, he gave the excuse that the Chou Enlai told him that these are all imperialist drawn lines. We are now reviewing the matter and we'll get back to you. And they did review the matter. In 1959, they told them that this line is perfectly fine and they're going to stick to it. So we gave away Tibet, no conditions. And we said, Hindi Chini bhai bhai. And we said all these things. And then we found suddenly that China had, encroached various parts which we thought was beyond the lines drawn during the British imperialist period. Of course, it is a fact that after British imperialist line, we should have reopened it with China ourselves and said, listen, these are all imperialist lines, and we think that it has been decided against India's interests. We want better line. So the way we have been dealing with China throughout, except for one period when Morarji Desai was Prime Minister, but he was there only a short time, and maybe I can say, to praise myself, that I was his advisor, and therefore, we understood China and we dealt with China according to their sentiments, and they also loved it, and they went along. After all, Kailash Mansaro was opened, which nobody ever expected they would agree to open it. So the period of Indira Gandhi also, the same thing. UPA, I need not mention, most of the UPA leaders had bank accounts in Macau, so they couldn't afford to make an issue of it. Priyanka had a handloom business with China, and which was not declared in her income tax returns. So I mean, there are all kinds of compromises. So UPA was a disaster. I mean, and the Chinese also didn't do very much because they said, well, these are our pussycats. So why should we bother to do anything? But I would say now we have a serious issue that we have to deal with. Now, when one most important thing we have to deal with is the status of Tibet. Now, as I heard today, I think Seshadri Chari saying that, we'll never accept Tibet, we have never accepted Tibet. But he was a part of the administration of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. In 2003, Atal Bihari Vajpayee went to Beijing. And what did he sign there? Another agreement on Tibet. And this time, he agreed that Tibet, 3/4 of Tibet may be merged into the neighboring provinces of China. And the only remaining part, which had only 1/3 of the Tibetan population, that may be called as the Tibetan Autonomous Region of China. So, Tibet is now not the same Tibet as we knew before. It is just a small quarter, and the population is only 1/3 of the Tibetan population. The rest are all being merged, and then the Chinese, they are very, very smart people. They have homogenized that population. They have sent people from other parts of China, the Han people. And so now what is left is a very small part of Tibet. So there Sheshadri in a meeting of intellectuals said, we have always considered Tibet as part of China. So today he's saying, no, it's not part of China. So, I mean, we look to the international, in our case in the international world, as ridiculous. We have to stick to one policy. If you have done, then openly say, we are repudiating that treaty. There are consequences of that. But then that will be honest. And that will be respected also. But don't do a somersault and say, no, we never agreed. Now, what has happened today is that China has, since May 5th, it started really April 20th, but May 5th, they have come in big numbers and taken over perhaps 120 square kilometers of Indian land, which is on this part of the LAC, which now they may say, no, that's the old LAC. Now we have a new LAC. And they have camped there with backup support of tanks and many other things. Now, this is it's too big a word to say an act of war, but it's certainly a challenge. How are you going to deal with it? We have entered into negotiations, but negotiations what? Please leave my land. There's no negotiation that I've got this land of yours and please exchange it for what you have just taken. There's no negotiation. It's actually a pleading that, in the larger interests of peace and quiet, why don't you just leave? I don't think that the Chinese would have come just like that. And one indication is what they have done with Nepal. I mean, Nepal has taken a very hard stand, you see. And it's unusual. I know Prime Minister Oli, he's a very smart man, his knowledge of history is superb. He's got a terrific memory. Jagdish knows, I think Jagdish came with me when I went to meet him. And he's a respected leader. He's a man who can stand up to India, which is an important factor in Nepal's psyche. But he would go this far, where you would suddenly say that this part of Uttarakhand is ours. And I believe that Bhutan, this is something the government can correct me if I'm wrong. I've been trying very hard to find out before coming to this program. I believe that Doklam, for which we fought, the Chinese have now a bilateral agreement with Bhutan and settled the matter with Bhutan. So we are out of that also. So essentially, we may have Sri Lanka and Maldives left. And that also, we must know our diplomats and bureaucrats behave well with these countries. We nearly lost Sri Lanka. But then, fortunately, Rajapaksa, he is a very devoted religious man. So he agreed to come and address a meeting here, and he saw the general public was very supportive, whereas he had been given this propaganda that, people in Delhi are very hostile to you and so on. And then he's been able to go to Tirupati, which is one of Bean's great desire. And he's a tough guy, so he's not going to be anybody's stooge. But he may have policies. So if we don't behave with him, he has every incentive to team up with China. What we are saying is, the single point I'm making now is that today, while deciding how to deal with China, we are isolated. The United States has not condemned this. And Trump may make statements, but then when it comes to action, there's nothing. There's no official communication of any sort. And all that Trump has done is said, I will mediate for you. Well, what for? I mean, it's very clear they have come to our land. I mean, the land which is not disputed. It's on the other side of the line of control, actual control, and so there's nothing to mediate. To tell the Chinese, go back, but the Chinese aren't going to listen to him because he's already, played ducks and drakes with the Chinese, and the Chinese have survived the coronavirus. Now they're going to normalcy, whereas we are getting deeper into it, and we have an economy which even before the coronavirus was sinking and now about to crash land. So we have three major problems in which we have to deal with China, and the question is, how do we go about this? Now, during this period of 6 years of Modi, I kept saying in our piece, some of these BJP IT cell types, you see, they kept on criticizing me. I told them that, see, don't go on saying that there's a golden era and a strategic partnership, world leader, all this. In fact, the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, had offered me the job of president of BRICS Bank. They were founded by China, India, South Africa, and Brazil. And it had a huge fat salary with all of the prerequisites. But I refused because I know where the Chinese direction was. And they would freeze it. They would, starve it. And that's all that H.V. Kamath, or whatever his name was, T.V. Kamath or R.V. Kamath, all he did was just watch television in his hotel room in Shanghai. And that's what I would have done too if I had gone. So I'm saying that the deterioration was visible. One was the refusal of China to support us on declaring Pakistan as a terrorist state. Other countries were ready, they used the veto. Warning number one. Warning number two, they never prevented North Korea from helping Pakistan and producing the bomb. Warning number three, they decided that we will take a hard line on these trade matters. I mean, I think the exports to India is about 3 or 4 times the imports from India, and they have not agreed to sit and monitor. You may remember that during when I was Minister of Commerce, I went there and signed the first trade agreement. It was they went so much out of their way to give it. So the first point, therefore, I will say is now, after giving all the other points of what's against, that China is a practical country but a bit emotional. If you are with China in the moments of difficulty, when they're in difficulty, and you stand by them, they are people who never forget. I mean, I don't like their relationship with Pakistan, but you see, in 1953, nobody was ready to even say hello to China. At that time, Pakistan made diplomatic relations with with China, and being a member of the American SEATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, they maintained that relationship, and they never forgot, and they have been there. Now, of course, they're a little unhappy with Pakistan because so many terrorists from Pakistan have come through Karakoram Pass, gone to Xinjiang, and they're creating havoc there. And so the Chinese, of course, have treated them very hard. But they are not soft state. They don't like any rebellion in their own country. So I'm saying that generally speaking, I feel even at the personal level, if you are with them on a difficult situation, when they are in a difficult situation, they tend to be very generous in dealing with you at another level. In 1977, when Morarji Desai was Prime Minister, they had a big problem with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was about to attack them. Soviet Union asked Morarji's government to allow them to take troops into India and then go from India to Tibet, through the belly of Tibet. And Morarji Desai said, nothing doing. And then they quoted the Indo-Soviet treaty signed by Indira Gandhi. They said, she signed it, go and ask her. I'm not going to do it. And that was conveyed to China, and it is that which led to the thaw, which we saw in the late 70s and the whole of the 80s, because the gesture which Morarji Desai showed. And at that time, the Assam agitation was going in the early 80s, and they wanted to go to China and bring arms. But on my request, on behalf of Mrs. Gandhi, at her request, I raised it with Deng Xiaoping, and he said, if anybody from India in that area crosses over, we'll arrest him and hand him over to your police. And they have kept that. They kept the word throughout. I don't know whether now they'll change or not, but at that time, and now the situation totally different. That time it's a highly explosive situation, and they supported us. So I would like to start with this thing. You want to fight China, then there is one strategy. If you want to be friends with China, then there's another strategy. And today the mood in India is everybody is thirsting for action. But without preparation, don't thirst for action. This is what Jawaharlal Nehru did. When he saw the country was up in flames after what happened with Dalai Lama and what happened in forward posts and so on, what did he do? He said, I've given the instructions to the army to throw the Chinese out. And he went off to a conference in Colombo. And the Chinese were ready, and you are not. Your people were in tennis shoes, and they had no guns, repeater rifles, nothing. They had an old 303 rifle, and so we got a thrashing. So don't do this. At this moment, our first priority, in my opinion, is to build the economy. And can we build the economy? Of course we can. Have we not built the economy after every crisis? What happened in 1965 when we were starving, on the verge of starving? We were begging for PL 480 loans from America. We were waiting for ships to come, and the New York Times headlined it, India waiting from ship to mouth. This kind of derogatory remarks were being made. And Lal Bahadur Shastri became Prime Minister, and he took his senior ministers into confidence, brought in some specialists like M.S. Swaminathan, and then he came up with this idea of the special package for 10% of the top farmers, and that's how Green Revolution came. He gave them first fertilizers, he gave them assured water, he gave them seeds, new seeds, which he got from Philippines and from the United States Food Research Institute. And in 10 years' time, we were transformed, and the whole world was celebrating us as Green Revolution. And the man who gave us the seed from the Food Research Institute, he got the Nobel Prize. Shastri didn't get the Nobel Prize, but he got the Nobel Prize. So, little common sense India. Similarly, 1990, bankrupt. We were about to, not be able to pay our foreign debts, because they accumulated so many foreign debts, and they all became due for payment when I took over as Commerce Minister. Fortunately, the Americans came and made a request that they're going to fight a war in Iraq, and therefore their planes coming in from Philippines have to refuel on the way, and India is the best place for us. And since you are people who have a new ideology compared to the past, you might agree. So I told them it depends on what price you pay. Americans, everything is give and take, and that's how we got $2 billion from the Americans, not American money, but through the IMF. But they have so much influence, they were able to give it to us. Everything transformed there. And Narasimha Rao took over, and he applied the same market reforms. And in 5 years, he raised the growth rate to 8% from what was called the Hindu rate of growth of 3.5%. I think today we are in a position to grow at 10% per year. If you grow at 10% per year for 10 years, you'll overtake China. China's model is over. I'm not saying China's model has failed. China's model was greatly successful, but it has become obsolete. And what was China's model? It was a very simple model. That tell the East Asians, listen, now your labor has become very expensive. you can't export to America all your electronics. Previously, you're doing Panasonic, this thing, Sony, and etc., and all your computers and so on. But now all has become expensive. And therefore, we will say that you send us semi-processed goods, and we will add value to it and export it. So they imported from East Asia, and they have a negative balance of trade in that. And then they added value with their cheap labor, and the Americans then came in because by then the Nixon initiative had worked, and the Americans were ready to give them anything. And they gave them a lot of money. They set up joint ventures, and then the production started of adding value. Lenovo, the semi-processed comes from Taiwan. Then they put the keyboard on it, they put the screen on it, and the covering on it, and then say made in China, Lenovo. So it's not made in China, it's made in Taiwan. So same thing with other things. And this switch trade gave them negative balance of trade in with East Asia, but a huge positive balance of trade with America and Europe. And that's how they piled all this money, foreign exchange and so on. To say that, oh, all this will come to India, it is absurd because we have not prepared for it. We don't have the kind of infrastructure the Chinese have built to make all this possible. And they had they had a labor which they brought in from the agriculture. And most of the Chinese products are really produced elsewhere. The only Chinese add the value. Take, for instance, your iPhone. It says made in America, USA, but it is made in China. And the Apple said, I will only make it in China if you allow me to say made in America. Otherwise, I will not come. And so the Chinese, you see, they are interested in copying technology. So they call them over, and now the Chinese are producing superior cell phones for world sale. So this cleverness now is exhausted. I mean, now China has to go back to a genuine competitive market economy, and that will be clashing with their political system, and how they resolve it is something you've got to see. We have enormous potential. We are not using it. We have tech agriculture. We have more arable land than China has. China has larger area, but most of it is unarable. But ours is more arable. 120 million hectares of land we have. But we grow only one crop in most of it. In China, they grow 3 crops a year. America also grows 2 crops. So the third year is the third crop they can't grow because of the snowfall. So if in India, which only 25% of our land is growing more than one crop, if we can grow 3 crops, we'll triple production. Where is the shortage of water in India? Desalinate seawater. The Israelis are willing to give you the machine. And we don't do it because some chief minister has had a deal with the water tank wala, and he doesn't want to give up that money. So Chennai will always be short of water, even though you can get water by desalination. It's not that we don't know how to do it. We have already done desalination of water in our Kalpagam atomic energy project for the residents of our resident scientists. In Jamnagar, Reliance has done it for producing. They have an oil factory. I think their oil producing company is called in Jamnagar, and they have put the Jamnagar municipality wouldn't give them water, so they put in a desalination plant, and today they are giving water to Jamnagar municipality. They are selling water to Jamnagar. It can be done all over India, at least all the coast, and then put by pipes. There are rivers which go to the ocean without being used. Most of our rivers are going to the ocean. In Kerala, there are 46 rivers crossing into the ocean, or 96% going into the ocean. So we have no water conservation system. All these are the things that need to be done. And small and medium industries, we produce the cheapest. They produce the ancillaries. We've been winning the first prize for automobile ancillaries, and that's why Tamil Nadu today in Sri Perumbudur has become is like Detroit. Why? Because our automobile ancillaries are the most superior one, because our chaps have been financed properly by the private sector, and they have produced all these superior ancillaries, and therefore Japan, which every year gives something called Deming Prize. Deming was a professor of statistics at Harvard, and he had invented the quality control system, and the best quality automobile ancillaries produced in India, and we don't know that. There's so many other things. We today have 60% of the world's thorium. Convert that into a reactor fuel, you will get enough electricity to give to all our neighbors if they are on good terms with us. So the India's potential has to be used, and for that, the most important thing today is that the rate of investment should rise from where it has fallen in the last 5 years. It has fallen down to 27% of GDP. It was originally 36, raise it to 38, and make the use of capital efficient by having reasonable taxation so that people don't do black money, make black money, and so on, and therefore show an artificial increase in the cost of production so that they can take the siphon off the black money. So give incentives to the people, and you can tomorrow start booming as an industrial economy, because we got cheap labor. Our labor is much cheaper than the Chinese now. And over a period of time, instead of this switch trade that the Chinese did, we can say we become the industrial base. We'll produce it from beginning to end. We are capable of doing it, and that is the way to go forward. But unfortunately, the bureaucrats of the finance ministry have scored. They regard all industrialists as crooks who have double accounting, etc., etc. And that is the reason why we have this situation where we are clueless how to proceed. Our economic growth is now down to 3%. Before the coronavirus came, 3%, which has never happened even in Jawaharlal Nehru's time. Jawaharlal Nehru had 3.5%. And it is going to be minus 6.5% by the end of this financial year, which takes place on 31st March 2021. So improve your economy first. So what is the strategy? Improve economy, very easy to do. Empower the people, give better wages, make them healthier, give the factories tax exemptions. Now, you see, just recently, they have raised the oil prices for airlines to 4 times what it was. Why would you do that? I mean, you're just squeezing the airlines. This is the time for airlines to fly cheaply across the country, but you're doing it, squeezing it, because you're thinking that if they all die, then maybe Tata will bring some Singapore airline, or some Etihad will come, or something. So there must be some angle in that. But I don't understand with anybody with brains would raise the air fuel prices at this stage. What is being done? And how do you get these messages across? I can't go on writing letters to the PM. I've been doing that, but after all, he has got so much work. And there's no use writing to the finance ministry, because they are too timid there, or too worried not to be known as taking a stand which is contrary to what the present policy is, or they just don't know. So therefore, India can, like it did in Green Revolution, like it did in Narasimha Rao in Chandrasekhar's time, again boom towards 10% growth rate. And if you do 10% per year for 10 years, you will become ahead of China. And that is the time when, meantime, you should be building up your industry, defense industry, should get ready, prepared, and then you start recovering what is yours, and the Chinese themselves may understand. And I think ideally I would like to discuss with China and win their confidence, which is possible according to me. Others may not agree, but my dealings with China I feel they are the most reasonable people, but they are emotional. And if they start suspecting you, no logic will ever appeal to them. Somehow fine. Otherwise, if it's war, then it's like Mahabharat, telling Duryodhan, give 5 villages. The guy didn't listen, and he lost everything. He lost Hastinapur, Indraprastha. He lost his own life also. So like that, have, like Krishna, till the, last you try to see if peace can work. If peace doesn't work, then use your strength to give a beating. We can beat China in that terrain. We have done it once in 1967 when the Chinese wanted to enter through I think it was called the Chumbi Valley, through to Sikkim. And our chaps took the tank on the mountain path. And many of them lost their lives, but they pushed the Chinese back. And it was a great victory, but we didn't want to publicize it just in case China might get angry. That's what the bureaucrats said at that time. That is something that should be shown on television now. The 1967, our defeat of the Chinese army in that place, how our valor of our soldiers did it. So therefore, have a positive attitude. This has happened. We need new policies, and these new policies first should get priority to improve your economy, because you're in a terrible, terrible state, and it's all your own making. And bring in new policies and transform India into an economic power, and then we'll tell the Chinese where to get off.